Hello academic weapons and welcome back to Student Express, where we produce videos so you can stress less. Today we will be on APUSH Unit 4, which covers periods 1800 through 1848, and my name is David and I'll be guiding you along the journey. We'll be starting with Jefferson versus Adams, one of the messiest elections ever, talking about the War of 1812 and the Barbary Pirates, and then we're going to talk about a little bit how the market changed, and we're going to end with the manifest destiny and how the West changed over time. We're also going to talk about how society reformed, mentioning the Seneca Falls Convention, which is extremely important for your AP exam. Unit 4 is one of the largest cover topics on the AP exam, both with stimulus and multiple choice, so this will be a little bit of a longer video with plenty of stimulus sprinkled throughout to keep you engaged. With that being said, consider visiting our PayHip, where we're going to discuss some of our APUSH Unit 4 content. It's extra content that features multiple choice, SAQ, FRQ, the whole 9 yards, which you can purchase for $2.99. Consider supporting us. We are a not-for-profit organization, which means none of us do take a salary, and we basically are just hoping to get monetized and grow our channel, so consider sharing this to a friend, liking the video, and if you have any questions, please put a comment and I'll make a video answering it. With that being said, let's dive right in. We have the election of 1800, which features Jefferson versus Adams. It was the ultimate political showdown. You have Jefferson, who was a Democratic Republican, and John Adams, who was a Federalist. The campaigning was brutal. The Federalists basically slammed the door in the Democratic Republicans' face as they framed them as anarchists. Well, Jefferson and his running mate, Aaron Burr, actually end up tying, which sends everything into chaos. So, the decision gets sent to the Federalist-controlled House of Representatives, where there is Jefferson becomes president because Aaron Burr is framed to be way worse than him. So Jefferson becomes president, and it's a peaceful transfer of power, which continues to this day when we transfer presidents. This is actually how we have the 12th election. We have the 12th election, which has the president select a running mate after this insanely messy scenario. It's not just the person that loses that comes in second place that becomes the vice president, because as you can imagine, they disagree as they were against each other. With that being said, we have Jefferson as the Democratic Republican, which features states' rights, strict interpretation of the Constitution, and small military, low taxes, etc. Now his party's in charge, and we're going to see some changes here. And we have the notorious Sedition Acts, which cut taxes, national debt, and tries to keep the government small. But alas, as we see, it doesn't eventually work that well because Jefferson, like all others, does like a little bit of power, so he eventually does end up expanding the government, which is why the small view of government doesn't always work when the actual president, when they actually win and become president. And with this being said, we have the two important things. We have midnight judges and Marbury versus Madison. So right before Jefferson actually ends up taking office, we have the outgoing President Adams, who appoints a wave of what's called midnight judges to keep the Federalist influence alive. And Jefferson's Secretary of State, James Madison, shelves some of these appointments, and so not all of them get sent. And one of the people that did not receive their invitation was William Marbury, and he sues, which is why you had the landmark case Marbury versus Madison of 1803, led by Chief Justice John Marshall, who's very important in early America. So Marbury had the right to his commission, but the law granting the court power to enforce it was unconstitutional. Marbury did not get his appointment. So sorry for him. We establish here judicial review, which is extremely important in the fundamental aspect of our constitutional democracy, is where the Supreme Court is able to base and judge laws on the Constitution. So the court now has the final say of what is right, what is morally just, and what determines constitutionality, not the states. Moving on, we have the Louisiana Purchase and the Barbary Pirates. Because Jefferson shrinked the military, we have a lot of these conflicts erupting with the Barbary pirates in North Africa, where they start attacking U.S. merchant ships and demanding tribute. And although Jefferson does resist, he expands the Navy. Again, when you get in that position of power, you don't always have an option to keep a small government. So you have the First Barbary War of 1801 to 1805, and that's where you have the Shores of Tripoli, which is in the Marine Corps National Anthem. Then we have the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, which was originally offered New Orleans for $10 million, but because of Napoleon dealing with Haiti's revolution, and the war with Britain that's coming soon, we have all of Louisiana territory offered for $15 million, which, as you can see on the screen in the green, doubles the US territory. And then we have the Lewis and Clark expedition, which goes to explore the new territories. Now, Aaron Burr, he's in trouble, and in 1804 he kills Hamilton in a duel. He's accused of plotting secession in New England and later in the West, but is acquitted of treason thanks to Marshall's strict legal standards. France and Britain are back at war, as mentioned on the previous slide, and British impressment of US sailors drives Jefferson to pass the Embargo Act of 1807, which bans all foreign trade. Instead of hurting Britain, it actually crushes the American economy because it turns out that banning foreign trade is not good for your country. And it's hated, merchants hate it, the economy is not doing well, so it's nicknamed Oh Grab Me and the Dambargo. And this policy is eventually taken away in 1809. Now we have the War of 1812. James Madison takes office in 1809, and you have war hawks like Henry Clay and John Calhoun, which push for war against Britain, and because of the British trade interference's impressment. So Congress declares war in 1812. Just some quick highlights of the War of 1812. We have the burning of Washington in 1814, and that's where the First Lady Dolly Madison saves the portrait of George Washington. We also have the Battle of Fort McHenry, which inspires Francis Scott Key to write the Star-Spangled Banner. Shout out people from Maryland. And then we have the Battle of New Orleans of 1815, which is Andrew Jackson's massive victory after the war is technically over. The Treaty of Ghent actually restores the status quo with Britain, but on the flip side, the Hartford Convention ruins the Federalist Party because they are extremely anti-war, so they're seen as not patriotic. This is basically one of the final nails in the coffin for the already failing Federalist Party, which we will see later. Now moving on, we have Henry Clay and the Market Revolution, and there's some important things to talk about here. Mainly, first is the Market Revolution. The war sparks a market revolution, and industry is booming in New England, and you have Lowell mills, or Lowell, however you'd like to pronounce it, which employ the Lowell girls, basically seeing the women enter the workforce. We also have the cotton gin. Up until this point, the forced labor in the South was actually not going too well. It was extremely costly and extremely ineffective to continue producing cotton, but with Eli Whitney's cotton gin, and that basically increased the demand for cotton, which in turn increased the demand for slave labor, and basically keeps it as a system in America for many, many years to come. Also through this, we have new transportation and communication methods with canals, steamboats, and new roads. Moving on, we have Henry Clay's American System, which promotes a strong national bank, protective tariffs, and internal improvements, which are the road and canals. We also have judicial nationalism forming under John Marshall, very important Chief Justice there, which strengthens the federal power. Again, we moved away from the Articles of Confederation, and now we're trying to form our new national government. And the important case here to note is McCulloch v. Maryland of 1819, which affirms the implied powers of the government and blocks states from taxing federal institutions. We also have Gibbons v. Ogden of 1824, which is where Congress controls interstate commerce, basically just clarifying a lot of things. This is a lot more important in AP US government, but McCulloch v. Maryland is definitely an important one to understand. We also have the era of good feelings and a lot of sectional tension, which will ultimately lead us to APUSH Unit 5 and the Civil War. With James Monroe's election in 1816, the Federalists are done. They collapse. Goodbye, Federalists. And we get the era of good feelings because there was only one political party at this time, but of course that did not last. And then we have the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which keeps a balance. Missouri slave, Maine free. And there's no slavery north of 3630 in the Louisiana Territory. Now we have the Corrupt Bargain and the Trail of Tears, which is with Jackson. So in 1824, there was a proclaimed corrupt bargain. Despite winning the most votes, Jackson loses to John Quincy Adams via the House vote influenced by Henry Clay, the War Hawk, who becomes John Quincy Adams' Secretary of State. Sounds a little suspicious there, which is why Jackson was so upset. But in 1824, Jackson comes back, riding the populist campaign. The spoils system, which is basically he paid people to vote for him, and he put people in the political office. Like, if you gather your city to vote for me, I will put you in a position of power. And in his presidency, there's a few highlights. The first is the Indian Removal Act, which leads to the Trail of Tears, basically getting people out of those getting the Native Americans out of the southern colonies and moving them out west. We also have the Battles with the Bank of the U.S., or otherwise referred to as the Bus, and the recharter is vetoed, and there's a huge economic crisis, which leads to the Panic of 1837. And then we also, more importantly here, we have the Nullification Crisis, which is where Jackson confronts Calhoun and Southern Carolina over tariff nullification and basically says, no, they cannot do that. Federal power here does reign supreme. Moving on, we have westward expansion and the Manifest Destiny. We have the Oregon Trail and the Texas, and we have Texas coming in here. And Texas became independent in 1836 and was annexed in 1845 under Tyler's post-Polk election. This basically happened at the end. It sparks the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848, and you have multiple different figures coming out and writing during this period, basically anti-war sentiment here as well. It ends with the Treaty of Guadalupe, which is where the U.S. gains huge swaths of land from Texas to California, as shown on the screen. With Oregon, there's a dispute with Britain, but that's settled in 1846 at the 49th parallel, which you see at the top. That is that top line. That is the 49th parallel there. We also have different reform movements going on. We have the Second Great Awakening and the Seneca Falls Convention. The Second Great Awakening feels massive reform, and it's where you have education expansion. You have the temperance movement, which fights alcoholism. You have women's rights at Seneca Falls Convention at 1848 with Stanton and Anthony. Although they are early, and it does not happen until the early 1900s, this was the initial seed planted for women's rights. You also have a lot of abolitionist arguments here with Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth pushing for anti-slavery action within the states and not the colonies. Well, that is actually all for Unit 4. Jefferson's Revolution to a Firestorm of the Manifest Destiny. Some key takeaways are political power shifts peacefully for the first time in 1800. You have economic change via the market revolution, which reshapes America. You have sectional tension over slavery, which grow alongside nationalism, and you have Americans' push for reform and territorial expansion. If this helped you, make sure to hit a like, drop a comment with your toughest APUSH topic, and we will answer it in the comment section below. Make sure to also check out our Unit 4 practice sheets. Will be shown on the screen here. For $2.99, you're able to feature a wide variety of different questions, which are answered by our experts here at Student Express. It's made just like the AP exam to help you get the best understanding of what it'll be like on exam day. Now we're going to jump into some stimulus questions, so feel free to stick around for that. Otherwise, I'll see you in APUSH Unit 5. Alright, so we have a few questions here. We do have multiple choice, and then we are also featuring a stimulus-based question based on a political cartoon, which is what you will see on the AP exam, of course. So we're going to do this like we have done the previous ones. We're going to break down the question, and we're going to go through the answers. So I always read the context here. This is the context. It's very important. It helps you, like, what time period are we in, what's going on. So we're in 1830 with President Andrew Jackson. These combinations of southern and western states are founded on no principle of union known to the Constitution. The pretended right of a state to annul a federal law or withdraw from the union is but the tradition's impulse of disappointed ambition. And the direct quote from the Jefferson Day dinner was, "Our federal union, it must be preserved." The ideas expressed in the excerpt were most directly a response to which of the following developments? A. South Carolina's adoption of the Ordinance of Nullification in opposition to protective tariffs. B. Georgia's refusal to comply with the Supreme Court rulings supporting Cherokee sovereignty. C. Federal enforcement of the Embargo Act during Jefferson's presidency. Or D. Massachusetts' opposition to the War of 1812 at the Hartford Convention. Well, we know We can rule out C here because we're talking about the states. And also, we are not talking about Jefferson's presidency. Similarly, we're not talking about the opposition to the War of 1812 here. This is way after, so this is pretty much irrelevant to this topic. So now we're left between A and B. We have South Carolina's adoption of the Ordinance of Nullification in opposition to protective tariffs. So if we look back at the language of the question, always good to look at that, we have the pretended right of a state to annul a federal law. Keyword here is pretended. They did not actually have this right. The states assumed that they were able to do this, but that is not true. So we are going to go with A here. But let's see why B is incorrect. Georgia's refusal to comply with Supreme Court rulings supporting Cherokee sovereignty. This is during the Jackson presidency, so it is possible that it could have happened, but it is not the most correct answer because we have the language in the answer and in the prompt, so it's important to look at that. And the answer is, of course, A. Next, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. This is from the first line of the Declaration of Sentiments from the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848. This is going to frame the entire discussion of the answers. Which of the following did the movement referenced in the excerpt most directly challenge? Keyword, most. We're looking for the most correct answer. The dominance of Protestant denominations in national politics. This talks nothing about religion. This is where you have to know what the Seneca Falls Convention is. This is an AP favorite, with people like Stanton and Anthony are AP favorites, so you need to know this. B, the market-oriented economy's reliance on child labor. Sure, that could have been a problem, was a problem, but no. Child labor, by the way, was very prevalent during the early industrialization, such as the Lowell girls. People that worked in the mills were typically children. You have the limitations of women's political participation and legal rights. We know this is the correct answer. We don't even have to read D, the federal government's control over Western lands. No, we know that Seneca Falls has to deal with women's political participation. Now we have our political cartoon. The image best represents which development in the United States history during the early 19th century. So let's take a look. Monroe. United we prosper. United. United. Clay's system. Remember, that is America First. That is shown through right here. America First system. One party. United. Era of good feelings. The era of good feelings was that era where we only had one political party, and a lot of if you remember, George Washington warned against having two political parties, so this is why this era coined its name. Let's look at the questions. The resurgence of sectional political divisions between the North and South. No, we are not at that time period. Well, we are in that time period, but this is not what it's referencing. A brief period of political unity following the decline of the Federalist Party. That is possible. It talks about political unity. Growing tensions over slavery during westward expansion. No. Popular opposition to federally funded internal improvements. This is not opposition, as we can see here. This is very much about unity. So we're going to go with B here. During this era of good feelings, we know that there is political unity. Next question. The economic program referenced on the signs in the image most directly aimed to achieve which of the following goals? A. Reduce dependence on the imported manufactured goods through protective tariffs. B. Eliminate the Second Bank of the United States to end federal involvement in finance. C. Encourage states to take full responsibility for infrastructure development. D. Expand slavery into Western territories. We can already cross out D. This is not about slavery. Now, the Second Bank of the United States was not during Monroe's presidency. And then we have encourage states to take the full responsibility for infrastructure development. So this is a little bit of a trap here. We have roads and canals. So that might incentivize you to pick C based off of infrastructure development, but it's important to read the whole question. It's not talking about the states. Remember, we're talking about the political parties. So we're going to go with A here. Reduce dependence on the imported manufactured goods through the protective tariffs. Clay's system. Manufactured goods allowed for these roads and canals to be built. Manufactured increase of manufacturing allowed us to get more jobs, which is why we've reduced the dependence during this Clay's system. Well, that is all for APUSH Unit 4. Make sure to tune back in for APUSH Unit 5, and thanks so much for checking us out, and make sure to tell your friends, drop a comment if you have any questions, like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.